Okay, let's get started. Today's study tip says, watch yourself carefully. Many students study material that they already know. Why? Because it's easy. So try to catch yourself doing this. It's very common that you sit down and study, you go, oh, look at how easy, I already know this. Don't spend time on that, okay? Get to the hard stuff, don't waste your time. Chapter 7. Oh boy, here we go. This is the good physiology. We set up the cell last time with the negative resting membrane potential of minus 70 millivolts, right? Now we get into physiology. And of course there's no rest till this semester's over, right? But this is a really neat topic, neuro. So just to review the parts of a neuron, you already know these. See, something you're familiar with. Don't spend a lot of time, right, reviewing the parts of a neuron. Cell body, the nucleus, the axon, dendrites. This part here where it comes together is called the axon hillock. Remember the myelin grows around the axon to act as an insulator, and these are the Schwann cells in this picture. We'll talk more about myelin later. The spaces are the nodes of Ranvier, call them the nodes. Information comes in through an afferent neuron. So afferent information comes in through a sensory neuron. There are receptors. Notice the cell body outside here in the ganglion. Then we come in to the central nervous system. We may or may not go up to the brain, but all that's done with interneurons. The efferent pathway leaves the central nervous system. We have two choices here, the somatic motor neurons, which go to skeletal muscle, and the autonomic motor neurons, which go to smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. So, remember, which one is voluntary? Somatic or autonomic? Voluntary? Involuntary? So the somatic motor neurons are voluntary, so you control what those do. But the autonomic, it's like the word automatic, right? Just auto goes. Those are involuntary. Classes of neurons that we just saw in the picture. The afferent neurons are in the peripheral nervous system. They have sensory receptors that generate an action potential. They signal, the signal goes through an afferent fiber where it's going to go through the cell body, which is adjacent to the spinal cord, and it ends at the spinal cord. Second, interneurons are entirely within the central nervous system. Their job is to connect afferent neurons to efferent neurons. And last is the efferent neurons, mostly in the peripheral nervous system. Their cell bodies in the spinal cord. The signal is sent through an efferent fiber or an axon, and it sends information to the effector. There you go. So this is our homeostasis stories again. Okay? Alright, fast, easy anatomy review. Fun fact, average number of neurons in the human brain is 100 billion. The average number of neurons in an octopus brain, 300 billion. The rate of neuron growth during development of a fetus in the womb, 250,000 neurons per minute. Yeah, think about that. Boom, 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 boom. Going so fast. Per minute. And the longest axon of a neuron is around 15 feet. It's in the giraffe, of course. Think about that, right? This primary afferent axon from its toe to its neck, 15 feet. A story about the octopus. I took my kids to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and after having a yearly pass there, membership pass, they were getting bored. They're like, oh, we have to go to the aquarium. I love the aquarium. And so I said, hey, I saw that they have, for a couple extra bucks, you can do a backstage tour. So you get to go in the back and see where they feed the animals, the aquarium that they have the animals in. You know, you just see the front glass, right? So you can see the top and the back side. And so took the kids in, and we're learning about the octopus. I don't know if you've been there, but the octopus is usually hard to see because it's nocturnal. And so during the day when you go, it's usually sleeping like in one of the corners, right, hanging out. But at night is when it comes out to feed. So the aquarium host was showing us around and telling a story about the aquarium for the octopus has a big tank, and they were noticing that when they came the next morning to work after leaving the octopus overnight, that next to that tank, I don't know if you've been there, go around the corner, you'll see a giant sea star. It's got like 20 legs. It's really pretty. And it was gone. And so they thought, what is happening to the sea star? So they put up a video camera to watch the octopus and the next door to the sea star, and they found another one, put it in. Turns out that the octopus was climbing out of its tank onto the ground, across, up and over and into the next tank, and eating the sea star, the starfish, and then coming back. So they put up all these fences, and the octopus would just climb up the fence further and further. So they have a network of people to help them around the country and around the world, right? And so they said, hey, how do you keep your octopus in? They didn't want to cover the top. So they wanted it open so they could feed it and everything. They just didn't want it escaping and eating the other animals. And so they suggested putting like a fencing around the top that's kind of angled out and lining it with turf, which is artificial turf, which is plastic grass. So they set up the camera, and sure enough, the octopus tries to get out and go have its dinner, and when it puts down its arms onto this grass, what do you think happens? It just completely slides down. So, the suction cups on the bottom of the octopus, they can't grab on to that plastic grass. So there you go. So if you go do a backstage tour of the aquarium, that's what you'll see around the octopus tank. Anyway, super smart. 300 billion, which is a lot more than us, eh? Alright, so now we get to look at what happens when we change the resting membrane potential. So here the resting membrane potential in this picture is minus 40 millivolts. So if you look down here, RMP stands for resting membrane potential. We learned the number minus 70, okay? So anything minus 40, minus 70 is average, normal. If you go above resting, it's called depolarization. So remember, the way we measure this is with a voltmeter. We're going to poke the cell so that we compare the inside to the outside. And we're going to measure time, and we're going to measure millivolts, and you're going to see it goes up when it becomes more positive. And then when it goes back to normal, which is not in this picture, we say repolarize, returns to normal. And then hyperpolarize is when the membrane potential goes below resting. So here you see it going down. That's called hyperpolarization. Now this I find to be a difficult word, because hyper usually means above, right? And hypo means below. So really it doesn't really have the proper term. I don't think it should say hypo, but it doesn't. It's called hyperpolarization, and it takes you further away from threshold, right? Threshold's not marked on here, but we can assume it's someplace above the resting membrane potential, and depolarization takes you closer to the threshold. Okay, so let's go through the steps of the action potential, and we're going to draw it. I'm going to draw it on the side here. You should draw it on a separate piece of paper, I think. Let me see if I can find this here. And what we're going to draw is, oh, I have to get the pointer. And the pen, sorry. Let's draw a line. Let's draw a graph, okay? And along this side, we're going to put millivolts, MV. We're going to put our resting membrane potential, minus 70. Okay, and then we're going to put a couple more numbers. We're going to put minus 90. We'll put minus 55, which is called threshold. We'll put 0, and we're going to go all the way up to plus 30. The bottom is going to be time, and the units of time are milliseconds. and we're going to just have 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 1, I can't fit in the 2 and the 3. You put the 2 and the 3 in. Okay, we start at minus 70 millivolts. And what has to happen is there's got to be some stimulus that comes in. So I'll put a little arrow here and write stimulus. The stimulus causes sodium channels to open. So remember the picture, we have high sodium outside, right? Lots of sodium outside, lots of potassium inside. So if you open sodium channels, which way will the sodium go? If you open sodium channels, sodium will go, because remember the inside's negative, right? Inside negative, so the positives want to come in, and they will when you open a channel, okay? So stimulus causes sodium channels to open. And when they do, sodium is going to come in. And what will we do with this line here? Draw it up or down? Going to draw it going up, right. We're hoping to reach the magic number, sorry you can't see it now, of minus 55, okay? So you must reach threshold to get an action potential. The voltage sensitive sodium channels open when you get to threshold at minus 55, okay? And sodium crosses into the intracellular fluid, depolarizes the cell, and it goes all the way up to plus 30. I know you can't see this very well because I'm drawing on it. Let's see, can I can't really move it out of the way, sorry. So let's keep drawing up to plus 30, okay? Then when you get to plus 30, the sodium channels close, and what do you think happens next? Potassium channels open, right. So next, potassium channels open. Actually, I have to go back and finish my picture here. When potassium channels open, which way does, looking at the picture at the bottom, which way will potassium want to go? In or out? It's going to want to go out, right? Because this is now, it's not negative inside right now, it's plus 30, right? So it's plus 30, doesn't like the pluses, it wants to go from high to low, so potassium's going to go out. And when potassium goes out and positive charges leave, well, how do I draw my line? More positive or negative? When the potassium leaves? When the potassium leaves, positive charges leave, the inside is going to become more negative, right? And what you'll see is it actually goes below the minus 70 all the way to minus 90, and then it comes back up again. So this is called, going up is called depolarization, coming down is called repolarization, and the little blip at the bottom, when it goes below, it's called hyperpolarization. Okay, so let's see what else we have. Voltage sensitive potassium channels open at the plus 30. Okay, you can draw it again so we can, I'll just do it fast so you can see. Goes up, and too far, and down again. So this is our threshold. So when we repolarize this, well, I'll mark it again, D, R, and H, okay? The potassium crosses out of the out to the extracellular fluid. It repolarizes the cell, and you reach minus 90, and that's called a hyperpolarization. And at minus 90, the channels which are sensitive to voltage say, minus 90, we're not so happy to be open, now we close. So they open at plus 30, close at minus 90. Now to put everything back, because you know now you've got sodium and potassium moving to the wrong place, right? We have our sodium potassium pump to put everything back to where it belongs. Do you remember that? 3 sodiums out, 2 potassiums in. Okay, so potential goes back to minus 70 millivolts. D, hyperpolarize. Now I need you to memorize this. I need you to be able to draw it with the units, know when things close, know when things open. So I want you to try it right now. I want you to get a blank piece of paper or somewhere on your notes, turn off the show, and see if you can do all this. Okay? Go ahead and try it. Don't cheat, by the way. Do as much as you can, and then check for your answers. Okay, did you get it? Now, the most common mistake students forget is they don't label the axes. So you got to have the MV on the left side, the millivolts. You have to have the time in milliseconds on the bottom. Well, what else do they usually forget? Sometimes they forget to mark threshold. Sometimes they forget the little minus 90, the hyperpolarization. So those are the most common mistakes. So you practice. I'm going to stop talking about neurophysiology for a second because I want you to think about how you study these steps. So these steps are what you're going to see on the exam or the short answer section. Okay, worth like 10 to 12 points, 9 to 12 maybe, depending on how much I ask you to write. So let's think about how you're going to study these, because this is really different than anatomy. Right? Anatomy was point, name, point, name, point, name. This is what happens, then what happens, then what happens, and what happens if it's too much, and what happens if it's not enough, and does it go faster, does it go slower, right? That's what physiology is. So the way I list the steps, your book lists it like this. This is really for the left brain learners. So there's a difference between the way left brainers and right brainers learn. And what that, I mean, we both have left and right brains, right? But what that really means is that we have strengths, though, depending on which side of our brain we use to study. So a left brain learner likes structure. And I'll say we, because I'm one of those. We're mathematical. We easily learn math facts. We're analytical. We need all the information from a text in order to come to a conclusion. We're auditory, so saying things out loud helps our retention. And we see details more easily. Most teachers are left brainers, and they teach that way. I am probably one of the most organized teachers you've had. I like it organized. I have a schedule. We don't go off the schedule. We have exams on this day. We don't go over. We don't go late. We have handouts. We have this. You know, I like it organized. I update the website. You get your grades. And for me, as a student, it really helps to have someone like that. But there are right brain teachers, and they usually are very clever and creative, and they're very different in the way that they teach. They are artistic and they're creative. Right brain learners are musical. They can often just sit down and play a piano by ear. They're intuitive. They understand text even if they don't know all the words. They can figure it out. They are visual. They like pictures. They draw pictures. They draw pictures in their head. They see the whole picture and get concepts more easily than the step-by-step details that I was showing you. And they're hands-on visual learners. So you might be a little bit of both, but really think about how you learn best. Are you going to learn best, with the step-by-step thing, or are you a whole picture kind of person? And it's tough for a right brain learner in physiology because the whole picture kind of thing comes after you learn all the steps. Okay, so getting to the whole picture part for you might be what you do first, and then go back and get the step-by-step details. Okay, so this is a picture of the action potential that I had listed in steps from a student who I saw her in class. She would doodle all the time. So the right brainers are always doodling in class. They're listening, but they have to draw and keep busy while they do it. Okay. And I saw her draw, and I asked her if she could help me introduce this concept of making a picture for a right brain learner. Okay, so let me show you what she did. Top left says, I have to find my pointer again. Pointer, options, arrow. Okay, top left says background. Inside the house is negative, and the house is a cell. Outside is positive. So the inside negative, outside positive. And she has a thermometer here to show that the resting membrane potential is minus 65 millivolts. Now when she took the class, that's what the book used as the example. So you have minus 70. And then start. So she's got number 1 here to keep us organized. One day there's a thunderstorm, which equals the stimulus. 2, the stimulus causes it to rain. So you have these raindrops, little spaces, and little hands. It says and they speak Spanish. Hola. It says, we are raindrops. My name is Na+. Okay, so sodium ions are going to come in. And it says, step 3, unfortunately, Adam's house was leaking, and the sodium fell directly into his house. And it says, we are coming. And in they come through the hole. Okay? And this says, influx of Na+, and you reach threshold of -55. So remember, these are the voltage-gated sodium channels that are going to open, right? So more open and more sodiums come in. It says, now Na+ have finally arrived. Inside the house is positive, outside is negative. Depolarization, and then she writes it again. Depolarization. So this is very important. So she marks the D part, because we have D, re, hyper, right? And it says, make yourself at home, darling, on the corner there. Number 5, on a sunny day, 2 potassium sneaked into the house. So here they are coming through the window on the side, where this guy is fixing the roof. So he's closing the channels right at the top. And he's whistling, making some notes here. You can see him. Hey, Bob, I fixed the roof already, equals close of sodium channels. That step 6 is now the inside of the house is negative, the outside is positive, and it's back to the beginning, which is called repolarization. So now you close the potassium doors, and you get that. She writes threshold, but it's not right. Threshold is -55 over here. But now the membrane potential is -90 millivolts. Step 7 has this guy here with like a cape on and hairy chest and his little slanty eyes. And he says, the door is closed, dude. You are too late. Potassium is gone. Let's go party and get hyper. So hyperpolarization. And then she says it again, hyperpolarization. And you close the potassium channels. And 8, the end. The end is done with the sodium-potassium pump, putting everything back to normal again. And your Adam's house is back to normal. Threshold is restored at -65. And there it again. This took her a long time. I mean, you can see she shaded it. She did a really nice job. And I'll tell you what, she did really good in the class because she did this for several things. And this is how she learns. There's lots of important things about the picture that we should point out, okay? One is that all the pieces of information are touching each other. Now, for me, this is insanity. Like, this picture just scares me. Like, I don't know, I don't like how this, like, purple part, you know, and it's just not straight, and, like, how come they aren't divided into equal boxes? Okay, so not good for someone like me. Color, pictures, it's weird, right? It's got a story, and it's funny, and it's got emotion, so there's a connection to it. Okay, so I thought I put a copy on drhayes.com, but maybe I didn't. You might just need to print it out here. But the point is that if you are a right brain learner, you're going to have to do something else besides all the steps that I had before. Okay, so make some pictures, make a story, make a connection, and make it a part of the way that you learn. Okay? This is a book I read called Teaching the Right Brain Child, because I have a kid who learns this way, and it's kind of hard for me because I am not a right brain learner. Okay, and if you've had a right brain teacher, you know who they are. They just talk. I mean, they talk and they tell stories, and then, I mean, and you're entertained and you think it's great, and then you leave going, what did he say? What was important today? What are we supposed to know? So it's tough to sometimes listen to them and know what the stuff is. So I'm learning how to teach my right brain child. Okay, and I'm not that good at it, unfortunately. I do try to give him as many different things as possible. And Diane Kraft, I've seen her speak, and she's a very good researcher in the field of brain development. And another one called Use Both Sides of Your Brain by Tony Buzan. Okay, now back to the action potential. This is what happens if you have a strong stimulus. So in this picture on the bottom, they have time and they have strength of the stimulus. So as you turn the stimulus on and turn it off, there has to be enough opening of sodium channels to reach threshold. So we're looking here at the resting membrane potential. Obviously, it didn't reach threshold, and so it just sits at -70. stimulus gets a little bigger and the action potentials go. Notice that the action potentials are the same height, right? Because they're all or nothing, we call it. They go up to plus 30, plus 30, plus 30, plus 30. When the stimulus is more intense, a higher stimulus, the only thing that your brain can notice is the number or frequency of the action potentials. So it says, hey, look at, that's a stronger stimulus. How do we know? Not because the action potential goes higher, but because we have more of them. Okay, so this is the effect of stimulus strength on action potential frequency. Okay, the action potential has to begin up here at the top of the cell body called the axon hillock. And then it will be passed down the axon, and this is how we send a nervous signal, right? From one end to the other. This is how conduction happens. So conduction is the movement of the action potential down the axon. We say down the axon, from left to right in this picture. So when there's a stimulus, sodium comes in, and the sodium bounces to the left and bounces to the right. When it bounces to the right, it's going to cause the second area here to reach threshold, right? To reach minus 55. And when that happens, it will depolarize. While it's depolarizing, the first section is repolarizing, right? So we have the red color to repolarize, and it's going to hyperpolarize too. So the potassium's going to leave, you're going to repolarize. Now the sodium that bounces in, or comes in from the second section, is going to go left and it's going to go right. But when it goes left, it cannot stimulate this section to go again. And this is because it's not enough positive charges to reach threshold. So this is called, this stage of the axon is called absolute refractory period, meaning you absolutely cannot stimulate it to go. However, the sodium that come in can bounce to the right and cause the third section to depolarize. And notice that we just go in order. This whole thing is kind of traveling, right? So we have depolarize here, repolarize before it, and then this all just kind of shifts to the right. Now the third section is depolarizing while the second section is repolarizing, and the first section back to normal again. So let me show you a video on this. Animation, sorry. Okay, an action potential depicted as a red band is propagated in one direction along the axon. During an action potential, the inside of the cell membrane becomes positive with respect to the outside. An action potential generates local currents that tend to depolarize the membrane immediately adjacent to the action potential. When depolarization caused by the local currents reaches threshold, a new action potential is produced adjacent to the original one. Action potential propagation, which I call conduction, occurs in one direction because the recently depolarized area of the membrane is in absolute refractory period and cannot generate an action potential. Okay, so it goes just one way. It can't go backwards, which thank goodness doesn't happen, right? Because you don't want a signal to go the wrong way. If you're trying to move your foot, right, you want the signal to go from your brain to your foot and not go back up to your brain again. Otherwise it won't get to where it's going and won't do what you want it to do. Okay, that's called conduction or propagation. Either word is fine. This is a picture of the voltage-gated ion channel. So this picture here is showing what happens. It says channel closed at resting membrane potential. And remember, this is just a protein in the membrane, right? There's the phospholipids. This is another part of the protein, kind of hangs down like this. This says the channel is open by depolarization. So let's say this is a sodium channel. And the action potential comes, right? Opens it at minus 55. And then there's a time when it's actually called inactive during the refractory period. And you can't get it to open. It's like it's blocked. Okay. It doesn't really look like this, of course, in real life. They draw it as a cartoon shape just for the books. Alright, here's your action potential. So I expect you to be able to draw this now, right from memory. Millivolts, time in milliseconds. You have a stimulus, you reach threshold, go up to plus 30, down to minus 90, and you come back to minus 70 again. This time here, from 0 to 1, is called the absolute refractory period. You absolutely cannot, because the sodium channels are inactivated. Now this part here, from 1 to 3.5 or 4 milliseconds, is called the relative refractory period. You can, with a very strong stimulus, remember you have to reach minus 55, right along here. So you can see that it would be really kind of hard to go from minus 80, minus 90, up to minus 55, but you could. So there could be, if you had to have a really fast signal to the brain, a really strong stimulus, you could go to minus 55, and that would make a really fast frequency of action potentials. So going down here, usually you wait till it's minus 70, and then boom, you can make another action potential. All right, so this is called the relative refractory period because you can reach minus 55, but here in the absolute refractory period, you absolutely cannot do it. Okay, so propagation of the action potential, which is the conduction moving, can only go in one way. During the first part of repolarization, a region of the axon cannot be stimulated. That's called the absolute refractory period. And then during the later part of repolarization, a region of the axon can be stimulated, but it must be a large stimulus to reach threshold. And that's called the relative refractory period. And you could even call that time hyperpolarization. So I have written here during the later part of repolarization. You could also say during hyperpolarization, right? Going back to the picture, this is down here is hyperpolarization. What else do I want to say here? I think that's it. In the peripheral nervous system, just a reminder of some more anatomy, we have the advantage of protecting the axon with the Schwann cells growing myelin. So they grow around and around and around like toilet paper around a roll. Okay, that myelin sheath is protective for the parasympathetic nervous system with the Schwann cells. In the central nervous system, do you remember how do you say this word? Do you remember your anatomy? This is called oligodendrocyte. An oligodendrocyte. So they grow around the axons in the central nervous system. And the point of the myelin is to increase the speed of the action potential as it is propagated, as it moves through the axon. So here's the same kind of thing. We have this blue area and where we're going to depolarize. The previous area is repolarizing. The next area is rest, right? And remember I told you the sodium kind of bounces left and bounces right. Well, look at, it's not going to bounce and immediately signal anything next door because of the big insulation of the myelin. So instead, the sodium zips to the next area quickly, okay, travels to the right, travels to the left, of course, but it's an absolute refractory period, travels to the right, and so this spot that's free of myelin will now have a depolarization, and then it will zip to the next area and zip, zip, zip. So this will be super fast, and we're going to do an experiment on this in lab where you're going to see the time of a myelinated axon, like this one, or an unmyelinated, which would have none, and you'll see that there's a real difference in how fast the signal can be sent and how long it can be. So we would not be able to live if we did not have myelin. Okay? Our bodies are too large and too long. And imagine that giraffe, right? The giraffe couldn't do it either. Oops, wrong way, sorry. So about the myelination. It's used to speed up the conduction of impulses. The Schwann cells of the are in the peripheral nervous system. The oligodendrocytes are in the central nervous system. No ions can move across the myelination. So the only space they can move is through the nodes of Ranvier. And this is called saltatory conduction. So I think Spanish to jump is saltar, so it's Latin base. So saltatory conduction, so like a jumping from node to node. And this leads us to the condition called multiple sclerosis. Have you heard of that? We call it MS for short. So MS is a condition where people have an autoimmune disease. There's a lot of autoimmune diseases, and lupus is one of them, Graves' disease, MS. There are several, I'm sure you know more. And that is when the body attacks itself, an autoimmune, okay, to attack the self. It's strange, but all of a sudden people become sensitive to their own myelin, and their body produces antibodies and inflammation and starts attacking their own myelin. They have trouble walking. Some people I've heard they start walking and one day they try to take a step and they can't move forward. So it can get worse. There the there is no cure for MS right now. There's drugs that people take, but mostly it's a bunch of anti-inflammatories like prednisone, cortisol, that kind of stuff, to prevent the inflammation, because it gets worse when the neurons become inflamed. And of course, having all those drugs have their own side effects, weight gain, and you can see in their face changes, like it's called a moon shape kind of face, and it's bad for your liver too. So that continues to be an area of research for multiple sclerosis. Okay, I think we're done.